Was hanging out with you on this Monday. Hope you're well, folks. All right, always excited to talk to our next guest. He covers the Eagles like no other, does an awesome job, and you can check out his reporting on the Birds at NBC Sports Philadelphia, and you can check him out at the Zangaro NBCS. Also has the excellent Eagle Eye podcast with our friend Ruben Frank, Dave Zangaro. Dave, welcome to the show, man. How you making out?
I'm doing good, guys. How are you?
Good, man.
Dave, how thrown off are you that we have night joint practices when you're used to your 10 a.m.? Let's get this bad boy going, man. Are you completely amiss today?
A little bit, yeah. I'm kind of a creature of habit, especially in training camp. So I didn't know what to do with myself this morning. And I'm like, it's always weird, even like night games too. Like you don't want to do too much during the day because you're going to be working late. So just like sitting around waiting to go to practice today.
Dave, why did they go 5 o'clock? Was that a request of the Browns or what?
Yeah, I remember last year when we were out in Ohio, the Browns do practice later, so I think the Eagles kind of catered to them a little bit, which seems strange. Like if they're coming here, like, hey, we're practicing at 10, get used to it. But maybe that was part of getting these joint practices agreed upon. And look, I don't think it's like a terrible idea because the Eagles play pretty late a lot this season. A lot of games at 4:30 or prime time. So like getting the body used to going through that physical exertion later in the day is probably not a bad thing, but me personally, not a big fan. I'd rather have practice in the morning.
I think you speak for a lot of folks in the business in regards to the night game. So we'll just leave that. That's our problem. Let's leave that at that. I want to ask you about the Jalen Carter play. I know it was one play. I know he wasn't in there for a lot of reps, Dave, but on that one play, kind of like Swift, you saw a lot of what this could potentially be. Have you, let me start with the play itself, but also have you seen a lot of that kind of stuff, some of that kind of stuff in camp every single day?
Yeah, there have been flashes like that. I think the key for him is going to be like, can he do that consistently? And that was kind of the thing we heard about him at Georgia too. Is like there were these moments where, gosh, he just takes over a game or a practice. Can he do that consistently in a game? Can he, whether it's 30, 40 snaps, whatever it may be. But like the flashes have been there in practice. Honestly, like probably been a little underwhelmed by him at certain times in practice because you see the flashes. He hasn't flashed as much in one-on-ones as I kind of expected him to. There have been some great reps. Like he'll have a power move against like Sua Opeta and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy is everything he's advertised to be. But he hasn't been as dominant as you'd probably expect in those situations. But not worried about the athleticism or the potential. It's there. I do want to temper expectations for him a little bit just because of the position he plays. It's really tough for defensive tackles to just enter the league and be dominant. It's a position that can take a little while. I think we're kind of, even though they're different positionally than like Jordan Davis and him, I think that just anytime you play in the interior of a defensive line, it's going to take a little while to become, a star player, but the flashes are there, and that was a fun play for sure.
Dave, were you surprised to see Jordan Davis playing out there at defensive end, or is that something you had seen in practice also?
They've done a little bit of everything with him. We've seen a lot in four-man fronts as a tackle, which, he didn't do that really at all as a rookie. He was only the nose tackle in their five-man fronts. The only time we saw it was in the game against the Steelers, the game where he ended up getting hurt. So that's why I always think back to that game, and I thought they were just starting to scratch the surface with him a little bit. I thought he was on a good trajectory until that injury, and that was part of the reason is because they found another role for him. It wasn't just playing on the center in five-man fronts, because I think that's like the next progression for him is to be able to be down out, maybe not passing downs, because I still think they have better options, honestly, on the interior when it's an obvious passing down. If it's 3rd and 10, he's probably not on the field. You're probably going to have Fletcher, Jalen, Carter. You could have Milton Williams out there. I think they're all better options inside on clear passing downs. But just being able to run him out there in a four-man front, whether it's 1st or 2nd down, if they want to do that, that's a nice option to have. So we have seen that a lot in training camp, and I think that's important.
What do you make of Jordan Davis, Dave? It's so few reps in the preseason game. You don't get crazy over that, but you'd like to see a play here. I mean, has he, what, in your estimation, how's he been thus far, and even compared to last year when he was a rookie in camp?
Yeah, he looks pretty good in camp, at least physically, and that was a big question. Like, what's he going to look like in terms of his conditioning, in terms of what shape he comes in at, and the team was very impressed by the way he came to training camp, and honestly that's a big hurdle for a guy that large. Is you want him to be able to like keep his weight, but to be conditioned enough to play, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 10 snaps in a row. There were times last year where he did look gassed, and it's not surprising when you have a guy that's that big, but that's going to be something we talk about with Jordan Davis for a lot of his career is what kind of shape is he in? Can he be out there for a ton of snaps? And I think he took a good step toward that. Now, I think it'd be foolish to expect him to all of a sudden become this great pass rusher in year 2. That's going to be a slower progression. I think what you want from Jordan Davis is for him to be everything is advertised against the run, and then to not be a liability out there against the pass. You want him to be able to get upfield a little bit because I think just being as big and as strong as he is, I'm not too worried about him against the run. And I know at times he's going to eat double teams, which is going to free up some of his teammates.
Dave, I said to Rob in the first segment, when Rob asked me, what was the one thing that initially jumped out to me in the game? And I said it was the play of the young secondary personnel. Eli Ricks jumping a pass. Evans makes a mistake, comes back, makes a big hit. Keely Ringo tracking down a ball carrier down the sideline to tackle him. And I'm saying maybe we have to reevaluate that this secondary might be a little bit deeper than we anticipated.
It's deep. It certainly is. That's going into camp, though. That was one of my favorite battles to think about was the depth cornerback spot because there aren't many spots available, really. I mean, you have your 3 starters with Bradbury, Slay, and Maddox. They just drafted Keely Ringo. They gave up a 3rd-round pick in a trade to get him, so he's not going anywhere. That's 4 players. Zach McPherson is now the top backup inside, and he's a special teams contributor. That's 5. We're up to 5 players already. I think Josh Jobe is in the lead to be the top backup outside corner. So there's not really roster spots for these other guys, but they've been impressive. Keely Ringo's been kind of up and down in camp, which isn't shocking for a young cornerback. Jobe has been the surprise of camp, honestly, or one of them. Seeing him not just get the reps at outside corner when Bradbury's missing, but he was making plays, and he's going up against Devontae Smith and AJ Brown, and they're getting the best of him sometimes. They're going to get the best of anyone, but he looks good, and I didn't have him as my top backup outside corner coming into camp. I thought maybe he could make the team because of his special teams ability, but he's ahead of Greedy Williams, and he's ahead of Keely Ringo for that spot. Of course, Keely kind of has his spot solidified. Greedy Williams doesn't. And then we saw in this game, I mean, I'm just talking corners, but Mario Goodrich had a few pass breakups. We saw the big play from Eli Ricks. Then we saw Mekhi Gardner on punt coverage force that fumble. They have a lot of good, young, talented players in that secondary, and there's just not roster spots for them.
Dave, what do you make of the running back situation? What I mean by that is, and I know Sirianni kind of poo-pooed it afterwards, don't read too much into things. It could be flipped on Thursday, but Swift and Penny are dressing. The Scott and Gainwell not dressing. Sermon actually, I thought, really showed well. And then Swift shows you that just woof. I mean, the ability there to make a guy miss and then dip a shoulder. Not so much for Penny. So just give me your general thoughts there on what's happening.
Yeah, I've seen enough of DeAndre Swift in the preseason. They can.
I don't think you'll see him again.
Yeah, they can go ahead and get him ready for the season.
Yeah.
Not surprised that they had. It makes sense because Boston Scott and Kenny Gainwell, we've seen a lot of. The coaching staff has seen a lot of them. I think they will play in the preseason, but I think the coaching staff was more eager to see some of these new faces in there. I mean, the Swift play, that was an electric play. And we've seen him do that. He's a flashy player. He can break off a big run like that. Sermon is an interesting one because right now I still think Boston Scott's a better player than Trey Sermon. And, they're not going to keep 5 running backs. So the interesting one's Penny, but I think Penny's done enough in his career where if you can get him healthy to the starting line, I think he can be a contributor. So I think those are still the top 4: Swift, Gainwell, Boston Scott, and Rashad Penny. And unfortunately, I just don't think there's a roster spot Trey Sermon, but if they can keep him around in the practice squad, especially with Penny's injury history in particular, he's not a bad option to have waiting around.
I wonder if you're going to be able to hide him again this year, Dave, especially if he has a couple more good preseason games.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't hide him last year. They were the beneficiaries of a team trying to hide him.
Yeah,
they were able to claim him, and they kept him on the roster all last year.
Yeah,
I will say that this is the time of year where we look at a deep team like the Eagles and we say, oh, no way they get this guy through waivers, but you do a lot of the times, and you might lose someone. A few years ago, they lost Casey Tuhill to Washington, and you're going to lose players here and there if you get too cute, but for the most part, these guys clear waivers and they're back with you right away. Last year, everyone's like, they're not going to get Deion Kane through waivers, and then he, no problem. He sneaks through waivers. They put him on the practice squad, and they just moved on. But I don't know. I don't think Sermon looked super dynamic.
I thought he looked solid. I like the blitz pickup too. I thought he showed more of a complete game. But again, it's we're talking about a couple series. That's all.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know if he's maybe a team would claim him, but the further you get away from when you were drafted high, the less it matters.
Yeah.
It'll always be with you, but he's never played. I mean, he just hasn't played in the NFL at all, really.
Right.
Hey, Dave, what did you think about this kid, Tyree Cleveland? I mean, we keep anticipating who's going to emerge as the number 3 receiver. We assume Quez Watkins until further notice, but, this young man took advantage of every opportunity he was given in that game Saturday.
Yeah, not really a kid. He's 25 years old. He's been around.
He's a kid to me. He's still a kid to me.
Yeah, we're all kids to you, Grandpa.
It's be Dave's last appearance on the show. No.
He's been around a little bit, and sometimes you'll see that in a preseason game. A little bit of experience shows out, and when you have a young quarterback like Tanner McKee, he's gonna trust Tyree Cleveland more than he trusts fellow undrafted guys. So. Wasn't surprised. He's a pretty good player, and he has a head start. It's kind of like Deion Kane from last year in the preseason. He had been here late in the year. He has a head up or a little leg up on the offense. He knows a little bit better, and he's able to make some plays. He's not going to fight for Quez Watkins' spot. He's fighting for a roster spot that might not exist, if we're being honest. Quez is still the 3. Even though we've seen some good things from Olamide Zaccheaus, it's been pretty clear throughout camp that Quez is still the 3rd receiver behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. That doesn't mean Zaccheaus won't have a role. I think he will, but he hasn't really battled for that job the way I thought he might have. And then if they keep 5, which I think they will, it's interesting because Britton Covey, I thought, I was looking forward to seeing him play receiver in that game, and he has a little hamstring injury, and he didn't. Because he's still their top punt returner. Now, if they have another guy they feel can do that job, well, then maybe you're thinking, okay, maybe Tyree Cleveland could sneak in there. Maybe Joseph Ngata, the big receiver from Clemson, who's had a nice camp. But ultimately, that 5th guy needs to be a special teams contributor, and I don't know if they have another guy they trust to return punts as much as they do Covey.
Dave, go ahead, Derek.
I'm sorry, Rob. How much do you think the high ankle sprain is setting back Nakobe Dean in his learning curve of being the eyes and ears in that middle spot there? I mean, obviously with a high ankle sprain, you have to be very cautious with that thing. But do you think this is severely setting him back in terms of getting to where he needs to be in this defense?
No, not really. I mean, he missed 3 practices. He was back as a full participant before the game, and then they didn't play him in the game. I was hoping to see him a little bit in the preseason game. Maybe they'll do that going forward. But he's back at practice. I expect him to be out there today. We'll see. But in terms of the mental, these practices aren't as grueling. You want time on turf, absolutely, especially because he might be working in there with a new player or two, because the other spot is very unsteady right now, whether it's Nicholas Morrow, Christian Ellis, Miles Jack, Zach Cunningham. They have a bunch of different options, and you want him to get time with them. But as far as him knowing the defense, I'm not worried about that part of it. I don't have to tell you he's an engineering major. I feel like everyone in the world knows that by now. But he's a smart kid. He picked up on the defense pretty quickly. The reps will help him. I think it's more a matter of figuring out who that other linebacker is going to be.
You mentioned McKee. Let's take a look at the quarterback situation. I think what impressed me most about him, Dave, was you saw a variance of throws. Like he had nice touch on a couple of those back shoulder fades. He drove a couple of balls as well, I thought, very nicely. And I guess more importantly, he didn't look overwhelmed. Like he looked like he belonged. Let's give me your impressions of his performance.
I agree. It's funny. He wasn't really throwing the ball downfield in training camp practices. The only time we would really see the arm come to life was, he's hitting someone on a slant. He's firing into a small window and you can see, all right, he has an arm. But to see him throw downfield and go vertical the way he did against the Ravens was impressive. I thought his best throw didn't count. It was that ball that he got down the left sideline OPI. Yeah. And even the one in the back of the end zone and he put it in a spot where only he could get it and he couldn't keep himself in bounds. But I was impressed. And Ian Book hasn't looked awful in training camp. He didn't look good in that game, but Ian Book is a lot better than some other third string quarterbacks, or at least camp quarterbacks we've seen here before. And McKee just won that job on Saturday night. I'd be shocked at this point if he's not the number 3. And I think they will keep 3 on the roster, especially with the rule change the way it is, and having the option of having an emergency quarterback. There's some incentive now to keep 3 quarterbacks, and I think he's worth keeping after seeing that performance.
Hey, what did you think about Brian Johnson said, let's go for it, 4th and 1 and is deep in his own territory. It's preseason. Let's just go for it and see what happens.
Yeah, I like that. And part of me was, though, I was thinking I'd like to see the punter battle play out.
Don't mention punter to Rob, please.
Yeah. Well, that was so that would have been a good spot to punt because you would have seen a boom punt. You would have had one of those guys the opportunity to just unleash their leg, which, that hasn't gone great. But I like that. I like the aggressiveness. I like them going for 2 at the end of the game, trying to steal that win streak from the Ravens. I'm fine with all that. Yeah, might as well.
Well, when Sippos was given the opportunity to pooch one, Dave, it didn't get inside the 10. I'm just pointing that out for people.
Both of these punters, their punter might not be on the roster.
Oh, thank you. Good. Thank you. All right.
Dave, don't give him
now I feel,
like
thank you,
that,
Dave. I feel a little bit better. I'm not all the way there yet.
They haven't looked good. Honestly, right now, Sippos is still in the lead, I think, based on what I've seen.
Oh, look at Rob's face.
Now you brought me back down. For a minute, I started to rise, and then I was right back to where it was. All right, I want to ask about Mariota. And again, I get it. I get it wasn't a ton of time. It was a little bit of time. But he looked, I don't know, kind of skittish and jumpy in the pocket. I didn't love what I saw throwing. I like obviously his legs, but I'm talking passing wise. It appeared he had a better last couple of practices, Dave, but it didn't translate to the field on Saturday. What's going on with him?
Yeah, I mean, watch his 8 years in the league. It's even when it's worked, it hasn't been pretty. I mean, he's just not. Even when it's going well, it doesn't look good because he's got this weird throwing motion. He doesn't look settled. I still think he's an adequate backup, and the things he does with his legs matter. I'll tell you what, I don't like to see him take hits in the preseason. Yeah. Like that, get him out of there, or slide, Marcus. What are you doing? It was kind of a microcosm of what we've seen in training camp. Just the accuracy hasn't been there. But then, like, how much are we expecting him to be an accurate quarterback? You looked at he's shown you who he is. 8 years in the league. He's a backup for a reason. He's been around like 62, 63% in his career. So to think he's all of a sudden going to come here in a new offense behind a backup offensive line and be more accurate, pretty foolish. So I think there's like a modicum of concern there, but he's the backup, and you just hope you don't see him.
Dave, I love the 10 observations that you do all preseason, regular season games. So I have to ask you, give me your top observation from this past Saturday's game.
I'll go with Sidney Brown. He was just fun to watch in that second half. He plays exactly the way he played at Illinois, which is it's easy to see why the Eagles fell in love with him. And I'm hoping to see him get some first-team reps here coming out of that game. I think he's earned them. No one has taken control of that safety spot next to Reed Blankenship. I think they have a higher baseline than people give them credit for. I think you could play Terrell Edmonds, you could play Kayvon Wallace, and you can get by with it. But Brown has the most upside. He's the most fun guy to watch play. He was flying around. His hair was on fire for that game. And with that, like, I think there are going to be moments if he has to play a lot as a rookie where we might see him give up a play.
Yep.
And he's going to take some lumps probably, but I think the ceiling is high enough that I want to see it. I want to see what this kid has to offer, and I want to see it now. I want to see him get some first team reps, and I think he's earned that.
I really loved, I said this to Gunner earlier, Dave, his form tackle on the running back in space where he wasn't diving at him, because we saw too much of that at Illinois where it was just kind of it was the old Andre Waters way of tackling, just kind of cut a guy if you could. Let me ask you about the open practices, because it seems now that the league has gone to valuing them more than the preseason game. So walk us through for folks who haven't had the opportunity to be at them. What goes on, Dave? How much of it is situational? How much of it is almost, real live game kind of thing?
Yeah, it really depends. So the way it works is like the two head coaches come together and they formulate a plan for what it's going to look like. And typically they'll start off on opposite fields. They'll go through their warm-ups, their stretch. They'll go through individual drills, and sometimes they'll do special teams apart. And the only time they really come together is for competitive periods. So you'll see ones versus ones, offense, defense, and sometimes they'll split fields to get the most work in. So, and the Eagles have 3 practice fields at the NovaCare. So they'll probably split today. Eagles offense on one field, Eagles defense on the other, and vice versa with the Browns. And they'll run ones versus ones, maybe ones versus twos. And then if they have time, they'll get some threes. The threes suffer in these joint practices because you're trying to get as much work for the ones and twos as you can. And then they'll face off in one-on-ones. And that means receivers, corners, running backs out of the backfield against linebackers. And then the most fun offensive line and defensive line. Those are always a blast to watch. And especially when Myles Garrett is on that other team, he's going to be fun to watch against Lane and
oh boy.
All right. So Dave, if you were a betting man, who would be involved in the first extracurricular activity of these 2 sessions?
I mean, if I were a betting man, I wouldn't bet on Derek Barnett because I don't think the payout would be big enough.
Good line. That's the line of the day so far. Yes.
I mean, he's the favorite and no one's close. This is funny. Beginning of training camp practices, like the first couple of days, me and all the other beats will sit around and talk about who's most likely to get in a fight. And Derek Barnett was the runaway. And at this point, he was coming off the injury. He wasn't even doing everything, but he was still the safest bet. And sure enough, he got in a little dust up with Landon Dickerson last week. He's a chippy player. He's always a good bet. There are some other guys. It's whenever you see a fight in training camp, it's normally a veteran they feel like they have nothing to prove going against a young player trying to make a name for themselves that goes a little too hard in practice. So it's always I always think like a Zach Brown. Remember when he was here a few years ago?
Yeah.
He was always a good bet. Just a guy who's like, it's hot. I've done this before. Stop trying so hard, that sort of thing.
Yeah, like Fletcher Cox against like a third string offensive, line. Like, come on, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing here?
That's why you keep your stars out of those situations.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, speaking of that, what do you anticipate Thursday? In the Browns game, is it going to be much of the same, Dave? Where with the not many ones? I mean, I know there were a couple mixed in here and there that especially on the defensive side that may be playing. But will we not see anybody again? Offensive line, Hurts, receivers, Goddard, etc.
Yeah, that's my inclination. Let's see how these 2 joint practices go. If they feel like they got enough work in these, they're not going to expose them. And that's really why coaches like these joint practices. That's why Nick likes them, because they feel like the work they get is actually better than in a preseason game because they can set up situations. Like if you want to work red zone in a game, you got to wait until you get in the red zone, and that might not happen. Whereas in practice, we want to work in red zone. Guess what? We write it in the script. Now we're working red zone, and you put them in that situation. So, and it's more controlled. The quarterback doesn't get hurt, which is a big deal. You remember last year, Jalen took that late hit in the preseason game.
Jets game.
You want to avoid that. So, I don't think they'll play many of the starters, if any.
Hey, Dave, if it was me, Dallas Goedert doesn't go anywhere near the field in a preseason game based on his injury history. I'm not putting that guy anywhere near a preseason game.
It's scary to put anyone out there. Like, what do you need to see from A.J. Brown?
Exactly.
Right.
What do you need to see from Devontae Smith? Like, you're going to – Lane Johnson might be your most important player who's not Jalen Hurts. You're going to put him out there?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Are you surprised at how many other teams do, though, Dave? Like, I was flipping around trying to catch a little bit of most games this weekend on the NFL Network, and, like, Mahomes, like, heavy, big names. I'm like, man, is the risk worth the reward?
Yeah, I mean, that's why so many teams have kind of changed. I think there are some old school coaches who believe it is, and they're still running camp a little tougher. Like Andy's he's still got obviously it can't be as tough as it was before the 2011 CBA, but he still has a pretty tough camp because he sees the value in it. And look, hard to argue with the results he has. I think it's it works differently for different teams. I kind of buy into what Nick has done. And that doesn't mean that there aren't some downsides to it. I think there are moments where we see some sloppiness early in the season from teams because they haven't had the reps, but get to the starting line healthy at least. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have attrition. The Eagles were extremely lucky last year. They didn't really. I mean, they lost 2 guys for the season, Derek Barnett and Marlon Tuipulotu. I mean, that was it. So that's not going to happen again. So at least get yourself to the starting line as healthy as possible. You have a talented team. You just don't want to leave yourself open to injury risk that's unnecessary.
Hey, Dave, speaking of injuries, and I put it out there Saturday night when it happened that Sean Bradley blew out his Achilles. He confirmed it on his Instagram account Sunday. How big of a loss is he in his role with this team, do you think?
It's a loss. I mean, he's been a pretty good special teamer. It's a shame for him. You really feel for him because he's entering the 4th and final year of his rookie contract. So lost some money in the process potentially. I don't want to make it seem like it's not a loss because they'll miss him on special teams, but he wasn't someone who really factored into their thought process on defense. And I think we've seen that kind of bear out over the years. They've had some pretty weak linebacker groups, and they never gave Sean Bradley a real opportunity to play on defense. So that he wasn't going to factor in on defense, but this is a special teams unit that wasn't great to begin with last year, and they just lost one of their better players. So it is a shame for the team, but especially for him.
Yeah.
Dave, we appreciate it, man. We're looking forward to your reports on tonight's open practice, tomorrow night's open practice, and, of course, the game on Thursday. Dave Zangaro, thank you, Dave. Appreciate a couple minutes.
Enjoy your busy evening.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, you got it. That's Dave. Check him out, of course. Also, as I mentioned, does the podcast with Ruben Frank, Eagle Eye Podcast. You can check that out as well. He's at D Zangaro NBCS on X. On X. I didn't say Twitter that time.
I will always call it Twitter.
X.
I refuse to convert.
Yeah, I don't look. There were some good things in that game. My overwhelming thought, and give me your impression. I was just happy that football was back, man. It was just nice to see some football.
It was on a Saturday night. It was nice to see not just the Eagles, but to be able to look at some of the other young talent around the league. And obviously, it's going to be raw at this stage, especially when you look at teams like Carolina and Houston starting rookie quarterbacks and the Colts with, Richardson as well. It was just nice to get a feel for football again. You know me, I'm going to reserve my emotions, so to speak, until that week before that Monday before the first Thursday night game. But it was good to get a game look at some of these Eagles players and some other players around the league. I must have taped like 6 or 7 games. I deleted them all last night.
Yeah.
I got to see my boy Jordan Love. Rob, you got me thinking now, man.
They're better, Gunner, than you're giving them credit for.
Dude, they're so young. But here's the thing. The offensive line is one of the better offensive lines in the game. Their running attack is one of the better running attacks in the league.
Yeah.
They've got all these veterans on defense, but yet the run defense killed them last year. But these young receivers they have,
Dubs and Watson can play.
Oh, and the kid Reed they got from Michigan State.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, Dubs and Watson can flat out fly.
Mm-hmm.
You got a quarterback who's now more mobile, and you see them doing more play action now, more rollout play action than they ever did with Rodgers under center there.
Yep.
Rodgers was more of a pocket presence. You got Jordan Love on the move, and he's throwing accurately on the move. He's got a strong arm. He's bigger than Rodgers. He's 6'4". You got me thinking, man. But you know what? I got to pump the brakes, Rob. I got to pump the brakes. There are a bunch of kids out there, and they've got to find their way.
Okay, so interestingly enough, we're going to do the NFC North in a little bit. So we'll see. We'll see where we both have the Packers. I'm more bullish on them than you, which I can't even believe I'm saying that, but I am.
I know.
All right. We'll get into it. I promise. So 1:30, Keith Pompey from the Philadelphia Inquirer. We'll get the latest on what's happening with the James Harden circus. And then coming up next, some Phillies. They lose 2 out of 3 over the weekend to the Twinkies. But all in all, pretty good homestand, 6-4, and they're in pretty good shape in terms of the wild card. So we'll dig into that NFL segment coming up at 2:00 with a ton of stuff, man, including an update on Zach Ertz and his health. So we'll do all that when we come back. Don't go anywhere. That's Derek. I'm Rob. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Let's talk about Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, because finding the right person to trust with your finances is critical. All right. I can tell you from personal experience, I went through it and I had a hard time finding that person, but finally I did. I don't want you to wait that long. So Jim and Principal Financial Group are the place to go. Whether it's retirement planning, 401k review, insurance review, you might have a new business. You're trying to get your employee benefits off the ground. I know personally, I've entrusted my IRA, my 401k rollovers with Jim, and I couldn't be any happier. You will be too. Give him a call, 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751. You can also email him as well, Murray, MURRAY, .jim@principal.com. That's Murray.jim@principal.com.